Hey everybody, how is it going? Hope everybody's doing good. Before we get started, kind of an obligatory Patreon link, but also I want to make sure to put this out there. If you aren't aware of what's going on, a man named Jacob Blake was shot by police for walking away from them. And as far as the video evidence that we have suggests, and from what all the witnesses say, he was breaking up a confrontation, and then police arrived. And when he didn't stand there, as cops wanted to detain him for no reason, and walked away, cop followed him, grabbed his shirt, and when he tried to get into his car, the cop, while holding onto his shirt, shot him several times. He's alive, and I don't know if he's still in ICU, but last time I checked, he was fighting for his life. And that link right there is the GoFundMe for supporting him. As far as I can tell, that's the consistent one that people are saying is the official GoFundMe for him. So if you can give some support to him, that would be great. Obviously we want to seek justice for him and make sure that those cops are taken off the streets. But for the time being, I think that his GoFundMe is the best route that a lot of people can go for giving direct support if they're not there to be involved with protests or anything like that. So that'll pop up occasionally. I just wanted to put that out there before we got started, because it's an important thing that's going on. Definitely don't look up the footage if that kind of stuff really gets to you, that kind of violence. But it's important because it's an especially egregious thing that the police did this time. But with that being said, welcome. This is Music Monday, and where I more or less try to go over music production stuff that might be helpful to you, or any of the projects you're working on. Maybe learn a thing or two. Trying to figure out more ways that I can do that. But what I decided to do today was pull up a session that I had mixed for an artist, Fleece Kawasaki. He's a good friend of mine. He lives out here in LA. Really cool dude. But he wrote the song, and we recorded an EP together, and we basically came up with extra parts and whatnot from like his normal like busking acoustic performance, and really added a whole lot to it. This is what ended up being the final product, and I kind of want to go from like a top-down perspective. I want to start with looking over the general mix and go over some like more general basic foundational things, and then kind of see how it all pieces together. So starting out, let's just take a listen to the song itself, because there's a few things that I definitely want to be like key sections that we go over.
There's
Cool, cool. Whoa, how long has that been going on? Oops. Okay, so what I just did there, whether or not my mic was on, I don't know why OBS did that, but what I just did there was I took off all the processing and I played the chorus where there's a lot of instruments fighting for space, and then I turned it all on, and you can obviously hear like a massive difference between unprocessed and processed. And that's a big key thing here, is that you'll learn that there's a lot of people who they'll talk up and down about like natural sounding stuff or organic sounds and whatnot. And my argument is that like most people don't like the raw sound of certain instruments. What they really like is the approximation of that in a way that sounds good. So like drums, people tend not to like every characteristic of the snare drum, but there are certain characteristics that are a little bit more prominent that if you amplify those a little bit and cut out the less favorable parts, that's what, whenever you hear it, you're like, oh, that's a snare drum, that's a good snare drum. But and whatever level of processing you do just varies on how much you want to use it in moderation, how heavily you want something to sound produced, whether or not you want it to actually just sound raw or not. It's all about your goal. But essentially all the processing that's going on right now is keeping this funnel system in mind, because the big thing is that it's all leading to sort of the same place, and it's created this structure where all the instruments are sort of fitting together. They're being glued together by the submaster bus, and the vocals through the master bus are sort of being that's what's holding the vocals together with the rest of the mix, while also providing some stability for other small things with like multiband compression. But yeah, let's start simple though, because if you take out these things, if you take out all the stuff that's on the master buses, this is how it sounds. And then if you add it in, you'll notice that everything on that was just added in is really subtle. None of it's like massively it doesn't change the entire characteristics of the mix. And the point of that is to make sure that you're not doing things that are counterproductive to certain instruments within the mix by benefiting like a certain frequency spectrum. So like for example, we have this right here. This is a Pro subharmonic plugin, which I believe is just this is just a native plugin to Pro Tools, that you can, I don't believe it's available with like Pro Tools first, but I think it's I don't know, I don't remember, lots of things have changed. But yeah, this is a this focuses on giving a little bit more clarity and oomph to the subharmonics within the mix. So like if we what we can do here is we can take a look at it and we can solo out frequencies. And 30 hertz is really low, so that's not going to be as awesome. But you can definitely hear that 45. And the idea here is that this is adding just a certain amount of clarity to those little bumps that are going on, and it's not much. It's a very very subtle amount, but it helps nonetheless. This is probably one of the most useful things you can put on your mix buses, whether it's for a subgroup or your master bus. But multiband compression is extremely useful. If you don't know what multiband compression is, it's essentially just you're taking the concept of a compressor, something that squashes down a waveform, and all you're doing is you're applying you're essentially making it frequency dependent dynamic processing. So in short, what that means is that you have EQ, which is equalization, frequency dependent gain, and you're combining that concept, the frequency dependent part, the part that specifically targets a certain area of the frequency spectrum, and you're combining it with a compressor. And these are usually really useful for multiple reasons. Most of the plugins have solo features, so you can listen to you can just listen to this, and you can just do this. You can just solo stuff. So that's what that frequency spectrum, 150 hertz and below, sounds like. And then we have 150 hertz to 1K. 1K hertz to 5.6K. And 5.6 to 20K. So what I have going on here is that you can see the sort of the lines a little crooked and whatnot, and the idea is just that, like, I'm finding oh, hey Overzealous, how's it going? Nothing much, just breaking down this session, going over stuff. But yeah, so the idea here is that I adjust these settings based on how things within that frequency spectrum act. So, like, for example, lower frequencies have longer wavelengths, as just like that's just science, that's just physics. So whenever you have something that has longer waveforms or longer wavelengths, the idea is that you can take longer to like activate the compressor if you want to. Sometimes people really want to squash the low end to make it really tight. Here, I'm not trying to do that as much. I'm not trying to squash anything because, again, this is the master bus. This is something that you're trying not to adversely affect anything that you've done so far in, like, the subgroups of your mix so far, because you want everything to fit together like puzzle pieces, and you want to view your mix bus as more of just like the glue for all of those pieces to make sure it stays together. Just chilling at work with a headache, but that's a lot of sliders. Yeah, it is a lot. This session, this session's not as I don't believe this is the biggest session that I did for the EP. I think it was Sea of Regrets, which had so many fucking tracks. But that's something I can go over in the future, is doing a lot of tracks in a session versus a small amount. This the reason I wanted to go over these is because we didn't really plan from the beginning how many tracks we wanted in the session. We didn't define whether or not we wanted to be big or small, and I was working off of a 2011 MacBook Pro up until the very end. So for the most part, these sessions were done with like an old piece of hardware on Pro Tools 10, like an old piece of software. So, you know, which EP? This is the Desert Flower EP. This song specifically is the title track, Desert Flower Interlude. It's by a guy named, his artist name is Fleece Kawasaki. He's my buddy Kiazi. I've posted about him a little bit. Let me pull up. There we go. Yes. Here you go. That's the EP itself. I believe he also threw in a demo on that. I don't remember. Which I didn't really do anything with that, but I did the main 3 tracks. I did the mixing, mastering, recording, and all that stuff for it. So I'm just going over this to kind of break it down. I think they sound familiar. Yeah, I posted quite a bit about them whenever they released it. They also had the Glass Beach Twitter for a day. But yeah, you can also find that on streaming services. I believe that they're still on all the normal streaming platforms that people go to. So, but yeah, as I was saying though, like I said, the idea here is very minimal stuff. And it can be really hard at first to hear very slight differences, which is why I advise practicing, like listening to something and turning away from like the actual visualizations of your compressor or your EQ, and instead of watching it, taking the time to like close your eyes and like move it one direction and listen for the changes, because there's going to be times whenever you make super small adjustments and you need to really be able to identify whenever something is kicking in, because in situations like this, you want to make sure that you're not doing too much, but you're also wanting to make sure that you're not falling victim to the placebo effect of like, oh yeah, I moved that, zero point 0.1 decibels, that's perfect. It's like, yeah, but did you actually change anything? Is a big thing. That's right. Mixing and mastering is a really cool skill. Thank you. I can only do basic Audacity stuff. Yeah, it takes time to learn it and whatnot. The good news now is that like there's at least a few tools out there. I always recommend to people, if you really want to get into mixing, try getting something like Pro Tools first. If I'm not mistaken, I believe Pro Tools first is free. Light version. Yeah. Pro Tools first is free, and it allows for 16 audio tracks, 16 virtual instrument tracks. You can record up to 4 tracks simultaneously, which limits you compared to like the full version that I have here. But Pro Tools is a really amazing software for mixing and mastering, or not mastering as much. There's better, more specific softwares for mastering. But it's very good for mixing, and if you ever want to get into it, that's part of why I'm doing this. Later on I'm gonna have things where I can send out stems for people to be able to do their own mixes and whatnot. And there's always things like you can look up stems for various albums and like songs that are just like you can just mix them yourself. And granted, you can't obviously post that on like you can't give that to DistroKid to put out, because even if it's your mix, it's not your musical property. But there's a few resources out there for getting started, which I'll be going over more as we go through stuff like this. But as I was saying, so I went over the subharmonics that I'm emphasizing a little bit of, the multiband compression that I'm using to sort of level things out across the board, and create sort of like a stable balance between the different spectrums. Are stems just individual tracks or instruments? Stems are essentially they are the tracks that are to be mixed. So it can vary greatly. Some people just record something and then they'll consider that like a stem. For me, it depends on the instrument. like if I record vocals or any instrument that's any live instrument, I'm gonna want to edit it first and make sure that it's cleaned up and solid to my standard, and then that's what I'm gonna consider the stem. Is I'm gonna print that out as a track, and that'll be the stem. So the idea is that when you download stems, they're ready to mix, and like you can edit them to make them tighter, but the idea is that whoever recorded and edited the stuff intended for that to be mix ready, more or less. Which, to be honest, you will likely end up in situations where you get stems and you're like, hold on, this track has a lot of noise. This track is not ready to be mixed, and you'll have to fix it. Which we can go over that too at some point. Luckily for this, since I had control over recording everything, it's a little bit. It's easier because I had direct control over a lot of the stuff. So, what external noise that there is in some of these tracks, I was able to eliminate and minimize to like a really negligible amount. So continuing on, subharmonics, multiband compression, and then this right here is literally just a compressor. It's Black 76 limiter that I got this as a deal. I got it for free from what was it? I can't remember. But it's T-Rack S Black 76. It's a really good compressor. I use it on a lot of different stuff. Sounds great. Has enough options for what I need for most things. I'll sometimes it depends on how specific I want to get with certain things, but for general compression, like, this is a really good plugin. And whenever you see what I'm doing with this compressor, you can see that, like, watch how much is actually being engaged here, you know, from, you know, 0 as the level. So, like, a lot of people on individual tracks tend to use about 5-6 dB of compression, so usually right here. But I'm only using a max of like 3 here because, again, it's light touch. I don't want it to be something that's overwhelming or taking away from stuff. I just want it to be something that touches it and does its job just well enough. And that's kind of the whole deal with that. Like I said, this is kind of like overseeing everything here. So we get a little less specific whenever we go over something like the Submaster bus. I saw there were stems on the Glass Beach site and had no clue what that meant. Oh yeah. So the Glass Beach stems are literally just like, if you want to try mixing the album or doing a remix and whatnot, that's what that is. There's a couple songs where the stems are a little mixed up because of like files that were lost or never properly like put out, but for the most part, yeah, that's why those are there. It's just so you can kind of do whatever you want with them. You obviously can't mix it and then release it on a streaming site for yourself because we own those recordings and everything like that. But it's still a really cool little resource. So if you ever do decide to do that, they're great. They're great for memes. Yes, they are very great for memes. But that's the whole goal of it, is providing resources for people who may not have the resources to start doing stuff like this. So if we're going down to the Submaster bus now, I've got a few things going on here. First and foremost is some saturation, which tape saturation just it adds some harmonic saturation to things, and there's a few different settings on this. This is kind of just this is a native plugin too, so it's like, it's nothing super fancy, but it does what it needs. And you'll see that there's not a ton of it. Like it's still within the range where there's not a lot of like clipping or anything going on. And like I said, it's because you're trying to get that light touch. But saturation is really good for like adding some aggression or some more harmonic depth to your sounds, which we'll hear more of that as we go, because it's on a lot of stuff in here, as you'll hear. Next I have an EQ going, and all this is doing is I'm only doing two things with this. I'm doing some comb filtering, or not comb filtering, but like it's damn near comb filtering. But I'm going through and I'm finding these harmonics that I really don't like, or I really want less of. So like, so you can hear how some of those are like kind of unpleasant and whatnot. And that's kind of the goal of it, is that I didn't mean to do that. That's kind of the goal of it, is that I'm finding the frequencies that are kind of like muddying up stuff or making things difficult for certain things to come through, and I'm just dipping it enough, like the greatest amount of reduction I'm having here is like, right here, minus 3.3 dB. Not much, but just enough that I can like get rid of a little bit, and where I need it. I'm also doing a small boost really close to 10K here, and the reason for that is a little trick that I learned at one point that is good for making your track pop at the end. If you boost 10K and then you go on and you add a little bit of you add a de-esser, and you boost around like just a hair, like not much. It's 1.5 dB, not much. It's kind of a situation where you got to use your ears, but you de-ess your master bus, or in this case your sub-master bus, and it helps get rid of some of the harsher stuff that's going on, but makes your track sound a little bit brighter in a really good way. I think it adds a little bit to it. Kind of a small technique, and you got to use it to your preference. Choose how much you boost the 10K. I don't recommend de-essing like a ton, like 3.5 or 3.1 or minus 3.2 dB is good, But yeah, so that's what I have going on there. Like I said, all that's very delicate touch stuff, and that's the way you have to think of whenever you're affecting so many instruments, because literally those two buses affect everything here, So that's kind of the deal. So now we can start talking about what we have going on with these tracks, and what we'll do is we'll start with some of the more foundational ones. So let's go with drums. So for drums, every single track on here has an EQ, and most of them have a compressor on. So the idea is that it's not always doing a ton, but most of it is just to make sure that I have control over the stuff that's going on. Because you can hear a lot of these tracks individually and think, sure, it's a kick. Like, hold on, let me, I'm actually gonna close that, and then if we mute the effects, which this is one mistake that I made in this session, is that I made it earlier on that I didn't think about this stuff, but having an effects subgroup, having a bus that all of it goes to, really handy, especially in situations like this where you're trying to solo stuff. Okay, so yeah, if we listen to the kick and this, So that's what I started with. So let's look at what I added or changed. So it's already very smacky. We've already got some really good qualities there, as is. And this is the live kick drum, so, you know. So what I did here is since it's a live track, I added a high pass filter. And my rule of thumb is that you usually want to high pass most things. Not all the time. There's sometimes whenever it's worth it to keep super low frequencies in, because the best way to put it is you can feel it. And for some people, that's a good thing. With tracks like this, I like to make sure that I'm high passing at 20 hertz, because again, you want to make sure your low end is not super loose and all over the place, which is one of the hardest things about a mix, is making sure your low end is tight enough. But you can see that I high passed it. I added a little bit of boost to the sub frequencies, about 80 hertz and below. And then I've added some 6.3K, so a little bit above 6K, to make sure it has a little bit more of that attack. And I got rid of like this whole midsection. And this is the thing about kick drums, is that there's a lot of unique characteristics and sounds in this range. But number one, I don't need them in this track. And number two, there are instruments that are going to take up that space largely. So I got rid of a lot of that to make room for the other instruments. And so you end up with something that sounds a little bit like this once you add it in. So without, and then with. Without, with. So now it sounds a little bit it sounds less woofy, and like there's kind of like a cardboard box around stuff. It sounds like it has more spacious air around it and whatnot. It's a more of a subtractive change than a what's the word I'm looking for? Than a constructive one. It's a destructive one. I'm getting rid of a lot of these frequencies. So, like with most low end things like a kick drum, where you want it to be tight but it's in the low end, I'm adding some compression. And as you can see here, I'm compressing it pretty hard because I want it to come down on this kick drum. I want it to squash it. Not immensely, not like all the way to, the maximum ratio or anything like that, but slow attack so that the compressor kicks in after the initial hit of the kick drum, which to your ears makes it sound like the kick drum is tighter, and that's just a normal everyday trick. But the knee is pretty hard on this, and the release is pretty slow on it. I made sure the levels were appropriate, and you end up with something like this. So without, with. Without, with. So you can hear that boom and that rumble that comes from like the squashing that's happening there. Having a lot of noise around the same frequency can definitely muddy stuff up. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. The first and foremost thing about your mix is that for me, I want to make sure that all the instruments are being heard in a way that's that makes the instruments sound good. And that can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. But if you're mixing in the box, then you want to make sure that it has the normal characteristics of that instrument, and that it's clear, and that you're like, oh yeah, that's a guitar, or that's a kick drum. And there's times whenever you can be like, I want to have this guitar track, but I don't want it to sound like a guitar at all. But it's not really the goal here. So for like, as we're going along this, keep that in mind. A lot of this is in the box mixing. There's a couple things that I did that might not be standard practice for some people, but for the most part, this is a pretty standard mix that's meant to sound good, and appeal to a lot of people who would listen to it. It's slight, but it can make a difference. Yeah, exactly. It's very slight. And that's the big thing about production, is once you get to the bigger picture, it becomes about like those really small changes. Those very tiny changes can make a big difference on how polished your mix sounds. So from that kick track, you can sort of guess what I'm doing with the rest of these. So like the kick out track, that's without any of the stuff added on. This is with. And you can see that I had to cut out a lot more stuff here, a lot more troubling frequencies here. I even had to cut out a strange spike that was going on over here. Very strange, but happens sometimes. It's just part of it. Some people will do low pass filters. I didn't really feel the need to do that for these tracks. Then there's the sub, which you can barely hear it. And I'm really only using the sub frequencies for the sub kick. So I cut out everything here, and like I said, I didn't use a high pass here because I wanted to make sure that you could feel it. It's very slight. It might not even be coming across on the stream. But okay. So now that we've had those, the big thing is that along with the natural drums, I have a lot of these drums reinforced with samples. Now, your opinion on sample drums might be more traditionalist or modern. Some people think sample drums are an abomination, that it's ruining music production like auto-tune and all the different stuff. Or you usually are a person of reason who's not obsessed with the old ways, who understands that it's a tool, and whether or not you like to use it is a whole nother thing. I wanted my drums to have more power, so I used samples. They don't outshine the natural live drums, but they're there for reinforcement, as you can hear here. So you can hear here, there's not a lot coming through on this, you know? Small component of a larger sample. Yeah, exactly. It's just tools. And whether or not you like to use the tool is one thing or another, you know? Some people like it, some people don't. Some people need it, some people don't. That's just part of it. So you can tell that compared to the... That's the live kick drum. That's the sample I have going. It's very small. So as you can tell, there's not a lot going through those. It's just enough of what I need. I'm only adding what I need. Stuff to reinforce what's going on. And that's kind of the big deal is like I choose to look at samples as like garnish on top of whatever it's supplementing. And for this track, I didn't really have to have a whole lot of a ton of sampled drums like overtaking everything. But by the end of it, you end up with everything leading into the kick subgroup. And actually, I wanna. Oh yeah. And you can hear this track. You'll notice how like this frequency, this area in the frequency spectrum, I had completely cut out in like earlier tracks. And this is what I was talking about. This room track, these two room tracks are providing the amount of woof and the the sound of air getting pushed, essentially. It has all of that in a more concentrated way that I'm able to control. And there are pros and cons to it, but the way I view it is that I like to use my room tracks for this. For that area that would normally be cut out, I can add just the right amount to make it sound bigger. Because, like, for example, I'll show you. So if we take all the kick tracks and we sold them, I've got these two muted, obviously, because I didn't find a use for them. Let's actually, boom, and then boom. So if we listen to these tracks, let's take out the room tracks for a second. So this is all the kick tracks together without the room tracks. Now if we add the room tracks, very slight, but you end up with a more powerful kick drum that has a very moderate amount of this air passing through it. Let's see what when I was in sound design in college, I was really out of my element, so I lead with more director instincts and focus more on the arrangement and placement of samples. So as opposed to using EQ and other elements to shape the sound into something you want, I'd compose a sound out of assembly and sound components. That's also useful. I mean, like, honestly, that's a pretty useful post-production like skill. There's like, whenever I was going to school, we had an entire project that was like, hey, here's an animated film with no sound on it. Make up all the sounds for it. And you were judged, you were graded on how encompassing your sounds were. So like, if you missed the sound of someone in the background walking, it's like that would be less egregious than like not playing any sound for the spaceship in front of you flying off. But the idea was like, how comprehensive is your sound design and how cohesive is it? How well does it work together? And that's kind of the deal, is like that skill comes in handy whenever you're trying to fit together tracks like this. But yeah, so y'all can more or less see how this like all fits together. And when you throw everything together like this, when you throw multiple tracks together like this into a subgroup, it doesn't always immediately feel cohesive. And that's why I have EQ and compression on here. I'm using Smack here, which I think is also a native plugin. Yeah. But it can really, like, you can use any compressor. I tend to use the Black 76 more nowadays than I use Smack. But so if we let's take a listen to the chorus, and let's hear the kick drum subgroup without any processing. So yeah, that's there. So once we add an EQ, you notice how there's still a lot of like unwanted stuff in there, despite the fact that we cleaned up each individual track. So we clean it up a little bit more. We make sure everything's on the same page. We cut out a little bit more of certain frequencies than like where we don't want certain things, and we add a little bit more of what we do want to kind of sculpt the final picture a little bit, because despite how it may appear, processing each individual track does not necessarily make for a good subgroup. And then we're taking all of that and we're compressing it, so it sounds like it's being squashed together. It's like glue. A lot of people like to use the term glue when they refer to compressors or sometimes reverb or anything that will make things meld together better. So this mentality right here, how I approached kick in this track, yeah, exactly. That's the thing, is like it's all these things that like you think that if you it's sometimes a thing of like, there's times whenever you need to do a whole lot, like this accumulative amount of processing that's going on. Like there's like you can see all these EQ curves that are going on in every one of these tracks, but there's still one going on in the subgroup, and that's a lot of cumulative EQ. The advantage of mixing in a studio is that you can do that. Live sound, you don't you don't have nearly as much leeway, and it's a little bit harder, and you're a little bit more stressed out because things are in the moment. But sometimes, like whenever you have the ability for that, like you might as well do it. But yeah, it's a, and you mentioning the animation project a little earlier, like the cough. I was always taught the theoretical realism can be defined as the accumulation of surface level details. And you mentioning the animation project a little earlier, like the cough, all the small details create a more true to life experience. Yeah, exactly. And that's the big thing. Audio engineering is like, I would argue like 75% auditory illusions. Like a kick, for example, a compressor coming in on your kick track doesn't make your track like objectively tighter. It doesn't take the waveform and actually make it like tighter. It just sounds tighter. Like that's part of the auditory illusion. That's why you can do really weird things with mic placement and sometimes just production techniques that will fool your ears into hearing something. And it's really interesting. That's how we get things like flangers and chorus and phasers and all those weird effects that you can hear on guitars and other instruments. They're auditory illusions, and it's really interesting. But that aside, you more or less see what's going on here. And on the kick, I don't like to use a lot of drum reverb on tracks like this because I'm trying to make this sound tight, and too much reverb, like even just a touch too much reverb, can make your kick feel really just a little too washy, and it won't sound tight. So yeah, be very moderate with your reverb on your kick drum if you want a tight track. Likewise, if you want something that just sounds super washy, there's also a place for that. But as I explained with the kick track, that's kind of something that you just have to do with each subgroup, more or less, and this extends out to other instruments. So snares, I kind of did the same thing. I've got these EQ curves going on, not always as complex as the kick drum one, and then even on the sample, I have this. And then in the subgroup, I have this, which looks very specific and weird. And you can hear the difference if you take these. So that's live snare track. This is a sample track, I believe. This is a snare bottom track. Oh no, yeah. These three are sample. This is the live one. And you'll notice that in this live track you hear the ride. And something that you will come across when tracking drums, if you're doing live drums at all, you will inevitably come across bleed. And all bleed is that something's very loud, and your microphone that's focused on picking up a certain part of the drum kit will pick up something else, and that happens all the time. There's lots of ways to deal with it. You can do things like gates to cut out any noise between whenever that instrument comes in, so between snare hits and whatnot. I didn't really have to do that because it's so minimal, and the sound of the ride didn't really conflict with what I had going on, so I didn't worry about it too much. I only really would have worried about it if I heard the right and I was like, man, that's really cutting into like this or that and whatever. And then I would try harder to like separate it. But yeah, so you can, just like with the kick drum, you can hear here how how it sounds without the processing on the submass or the subgroup. It sounds like a snare. Sounds a little bit more firm. And that compressor adds a whole lot to it. Something I've learned that I like to make sure of is that when you're compressing snare drum, there's a tendency to compress it too hard. And by that I mean having your ratio too great. So I don't like to go above, like 4-to-1 is the maximum I'll usually go, because after that the snare drum starts to sound really thin, and I like my snare drum to sound thick. I still like it to sound like it's a big snare drum, because the smack is the most important part to get through, and some mixes don't really require a quote unquote fat snare drum, but I like that sound whenever I can get it. Before we move on, I do want to show this is a gate. This is what I was talking about earlier. So you'll notice the way this works is essentially when a signal is fed into the gate, there's a threshold, there's a limit, and when it reaches above that limit, the gate will open. There's settings on how fast it opens, how long it stays open for after the signal drops below the threshold, and how fast it closes. I tend not to have to use gates a whole lot because I like to do a lot of isolated tracking, but some people end up having to use it more than others. It's a really good tool for snares, and especially your snare bottom, where you might get like kick drum and stuff like that bleeding into that. So rather than repeating myself, essentially it's the same mentality as the kick. You're just focused on the positive aspects of the snare. So like around 7K, I'm getting a really good pop from this snare, getting rid of this section which isn't really useful to it. Some of these tracks I'm boosting the lower end to give it that thickness and whatnot. Yeah, exactly. Thick snares are really great. They're really nice and solid. And I'm using quite a bit more reverb than the kick on the snare because, well, why not? Because if we add the reverb in and then do that, and then if we add reverb, you hear how that widened it up a little bit? Without, then with. So the goal there, there's a lot of different reasons you can add a reverb to snare. You can try to make it just echo out and just, but my goal here was just simply to make the snare go from here to, I mean, you can't, it was just so from here to here. I just wanted it to widen out a little bit, and so the reverb is adding a little bit of space to it for that very purpose. And yeah, and we move on, and as we move on, you can see certain things like there's a hi-hat. I added an EQ, not my fancy Pro Q3, but I added, this is just the stock EQ, and I boosted the higher frequencies on this because it's a little too dark, and I don't really need lower frequencies with the hi-hat. I really just need that crisp. I just need to hear it come through, which hi-hats cut through a lot. Fair warning, when you do your mix, make sure you test in your car, because car speakers tend to bring out the worst of your hi-hat sometimes. At least in my opinion. I like to do speaker test, headphone test, car test, and what's it called? I'll sometimes do like a test on, like, we have a Google Nest or whatever. But I like to do it in every common way I expect people to listen to a track. And we have a few other things going on here, like we got tambourines. And mostly just cut out the low end that we didn't need, because like there's no reason to have that there, you know. And I just boosted where I felt like the fundamentals were strongest. Toms get really complicated sometimes. Albertson's radio speaker test. Yeah, honestly, here is a tip that I've gotten from several pros that I have also used and I find really useful. Never doubt the usefulness of testing your mix on in mono. And what I mean by that is buy a little Aratone speaker, just a tiny crappy cube speaker, and just listen to your mix in mono sometimes, because we do a lot of panning. And like making sure that like guitar left and right are like, you know, apart and everything like that. But as much as that can be useful, we tend sometimes we can really miss some of the very specific phase issues that happen that can happen between those tracks when put into mono. So the idea is that when you listen to it in mono, you're taking those tracks that are normally panned out here and you're listening to them right next to each other. So you're able to tell if two tracks are working against each other. And to explain phase issues in a very simple way, if you take two speakers and you put them flush to each other, and you're playing, trying to get my hands in for the visualization. If you have two speakers that are flush, and you're playing the same thing to them, if you move one speaker back or one speaker forward, and you just move it slightly, there's going to be a certain point where certain frequencies kind of dip out. You stop being able to hear certain things as well. And that's what we call phase issues. All it means is that a sound wave that goes like, wiggles, means that one sound wave is going one way, and then another sound wave doing the same thing or in the same frequency spectrum is moving just slightly behind or ahead of that other wave, making it to where like their peaks are completely opposite, like they're doing kind of that thing. And the problem is that what that does is essentially cancels out the wavelength, makes it way quieter. That's destructive interference. It's the opposite of taking doing two takes of a guitar or whatever to make it sound bigger. It's kind of the opposite problem that we face with it. We want to make sure that none of the parts are canceling each other out or lowering the volume overall. And that's just something you got to test for. It's a very specific issue. It's not something that you'll immediately be able to identify. It's not something that you'll pick up on. At least I didn't pick it up on immediately. Some people may be able to do it better than I did starting out, but it's still important. So yeah, test your mixes in mono. Very important. So toms, to put it short, toms are a little bit more complicated kick drum. You want to make sure you're getting the beater sound, but you also want to make sure you're getting the actual note of the kick drum, which is pretty low. You want to cut out a bunch of the extra crap that's there. So like if we listen to this, and you can hear like the sounds in between are cut out. That's from editing and whatnot. So if we take out the EQ, It's not a whole lot of difference, but it's enough that you can see in the visualization that this frequency range is lowered, so we get a little bit more of the low end and the high end. And the concept behind that is that there's going to be times when you're mixing and you're going to hear something and you're going to be like, oh, I need to make that louder, or I need to make this frequency louder, or that part of it louder. But I would advise, if you can, try making the thing that is drowning it out a little bit quieter first. It's easier to deal with less on your plate than to try to stack more things on your plate constantly. And that's kind of the concept behind the kick drum, is that I'm emphasizing these frequencies, not just by boosting them, by decreasing these other frequencies. This is true for the floor tom too. Kind of doing a similar thing. And then we both have, both of them have compressors on them. Not as hard as the kick drum, but still relatively hard, because I want to make sure that the note's coming through, but I also want the impact to be there, because there's a few different approaches to toms. Some people like more impact, some people like more of the note to be there. It kind of just varies. But moving on, you can kind of see that I have a subgroup for the toms as well. I'm also compressing them too. Overheads, I like to make sure that I'm cutting out all of the extra low end, because if we take a listen to this, that's a whole ass drum kit. Cut that out. We no longer, like, we can still hear the snare smack a little bit. Don't have to worry too much about the other stuff. And that's the idea, is that what we want most of is the cymbals, and we want whatever there is of the snare drum and all the shells of the drum kit and whatnot, whatever else is there, we want that to be negligible, something that's not going to work against what is already there, what we have control of. And if you can, you sometimes want to try to make sure it works with it. That's kind of the goal, more or less. Cut out everything that's not useful, emphasize what is useful. The rooms, I kind of did the same thing that I did with the room kick drum up above. I had a very particular tracking method for this that I'll go over at another point, but I'm doing the same thing with these room mics that I did with the room kick drum. You can hear what's going on there. Without any EQ, that's how they sound. You add it in, a lot of stuff's cut out. And you can see they're being compressed. Like, I'm compressing the crap out of these. And that's intentional. This is supposed to serve the same purpose, adding a little bit of extra power and woof to them. So now, if we take our entire drum kit, solo it, listen to the chorus. Oh. Now, we add in the drum reverb that we've added onto these things. See how this feels really centered, but the moment you add reverb, it widens out. And that's kind of the effect we want. Some mixes like to make sure the drums are in the center, as if you're in the room watching a band play stuff. I like... in this mix, I really wanted the drums to sound wide enough to where it felt like it was hugging the rest of the instruments. That's kind of the goal there. And there's a few different techniques you can use for that. There's some miking techniques that can help out with that. But in the end, that's more or less what I have going on with the drums. Yeah. Okay, so moving on. The next most basic part of this is the bass. We had to go through a lot of different takes of the bass. And there are some parts, it varied a whole lot. It was stuff that we had to change as we went, and made changes because sometimes we would add an instrument and be like, well, I think the bass would do better there if it followed along more with what this instrument was doing and whatnot. So if we just listen to the bass, what's going on here? Let's hear the verse, because that's where the bass lines are really like sitting pretty high in the mix. We had a pretty good bass to work with. So a decent bass tone to start off. And if you're wondering what all these cuts are, that's from the editing. That's from the editing. A lot of very slight adjustments, just to make sure that things are, if not directly on beat, close enough to on beat that it works. Because that's kind of the thing is you can make something super tight to the point where everything is on beat and everything is sounds like another really powerful strike, which if you listen to Pierce the Veil songs, that's kind of that mixing style, or that editing style, which you can use or you can reject or whatever, it just depends on what you want to do. But what we have going on here is I don't like it to always be super on beat whenever it's songs like this, where there's room for a little bit of looseness in the mix, and it makes more sense not for it to be all super tight. So if we're listening to the bass, we got this going on. So first thing that I like to do is I like to make sure that I'm using a compressor to get the bass at an appropriate level. It's not too high, but not too low. So a lot of light compression, close to 6 dB. Nothing super intense. Very soft knee. I want it to sound a little bit tighter, so it's a little bit of a slower attack and faster release, that kind of thing. So now I'm going to take out the elements that I don't want in the bass, and I want to emphasize the things that I do like in the bass. So when we add in the EQ that we have here, without, with. It's not a massive difference, but it's close enough. And I wanted a little bit more aggression with the bass. I wanted it to be a little bit more in your face, especially in the verses. So I added a SansAmp plugin, which just comes stock in Pro Tools. And this can be pretty useful. It can really change up how your bass sounds. It can make it more aggressive in a lot of really good ways. But what we end up with is I'll start without and then I'll add it in. So without, and then if we add it in, without, with. So it has a little bit more power in the low end after adding that in there. And these are all, it accentuates it. That's the big thing, is that it's not meant to be like a massive overhaul, like change of the tone. A way I like to paint the picture for people is that good tracks are like good ingredients. Like, you're going to have a better finished product if you have better ingredients to work with. That's just how it is. And it doesn't mean that you can't drastically like change a bad track into a much better track. That's also possible. Don't get me wrong. And at one point I really want to do that. I really want to try to find a way to track things in the worst way possible and then try to make something good out of it. Or in the most unconventional way possible, and then make something sound really good. But yeah, that's the idea with that. And so whenever you add it into the mix, this is an important thing. You should always be mixing back and forth in A and B, doing an A/B test between how it sounds by itself and then how it sounds in the mix. Because there's going to be times whenever you might make a change that sounds good by itself, but isn't working out so well in the actual full-on mix. So I really advise being careful with that, not soloing too much. But yeah, so we got our drums, we got our bass, and these are kind of the foundational things for the song, obviously. So at the very end, I have what did I have going on here? I don't even know why that's on there. I might have just accidentally left that on there. It's not really doing anything. Oh well. So something I want to show for the drums before we move on is I use this a lot with rock mixing, and I think it's a really important thing if you want tight, powerful drums. And this is called parallel compression. So what is parallel compression? When you run all the tracks in this example, when you run all of your drum tracks through a subgroup, you can create a duplicate of that. So both of these subgroups have the drums going through them, both of them, same signal going in. The difference is that this one has a pretty simple EQ on it that I added. I think I had just some harsh high end I wanted to get rid of. But right here, I added a good chunk of EQ. I boosted the lows and I boosted the highs. And then I compressed the hell out of it right here. So you can watch. So it's compressing it really hard. And then if we go over here to our faders, you can see that I have my normal drum subgroup quite a bit higher than my my compressed subgroup. And so these two side by side, these two signals create parallel compression. And the idea is that you're able to adjust how much of the compressed signal you're blending in to your quote unquote natural drum sound. Because what you end up with, let's just take a listen to how different this can be. But let's do it in mix, so that way y'all can hear the difference with everything in context. So close that. Do the chorus. Without, with. Without, with. And so you can definitely hear that there's a lot more power and clarity coming through. And you might be wondering, how does the compressed signal sound by itself? Well, that's the uncompressed signal. That's together. That's the compressed signal. So you can definitely hear that the compressor is overly aggressive. It's pushing it down really hard, and it sounds kind of weird and like by itself. But together it works. It works really well. It's a really solid technique. The style I'm using is specifically called, it's usually referred to as New York style parallel compression. But that can vary depending on who you're talking to. So probably the next most important thing is our guitars. As you can see, we got a lot of guitars. I got some stuff that's muted out because some of these tracks just didn't end up working out with the general picture of everything. but obviously these take up the most consistent space. And that's because these are the acoustic guitars. These were some of the first things that we recorded for Desert Flower, and all the songs really, because that's Kiazi's main instrument is the acoustic guitar. So we started with this, and then we built around it with everything else. Casper DH, this is Pro Tools. I always like to throw out there for anybody who's looking to get into production but may not have the money at the moment that there is a free version of Pro Tools. It only allows you 16 audio tracks and 16 virtual instrument tracks, but only recording with 4 tracks at a time. But it is a solid program if you're looking to get into mixing. And our website, which I can boom, that is wait. What the heck? Okay. Yeah, okay, there we go. Sorry, my bit defender was being weird about stuff. So, that's my band's website, and you can find stems for our songs there. So if you're like, well, that would be cool, I just don't have anything to mix with, go ahead and practice on our stuff. Make remixes, do stuff with it. That's always there if you ever need it. But yeah, I'm using Pro Tools 12 though. So whenever we started, the idea is that no problem at all. It's what we do, and that's the reason for Music Mondays. So with acoustic guitar, I typically just had Kiazi go through and do a few takes of him just playing through the song. And they're pretty standard tracks. I will show you what they sound without any processing on them. Get rid of reverb. Oh, drums are still there. My bad. Mute that. Okay, cool. So it's kind of quiet, which is why I added compression. I add compression to make sure that it's brought up to level. glassbeachband.gov. Yeah, one day I would love for us to have that website. Which, by the way, that link that Moobot just tweeted or Moobot just put in chat. There's a man named Jacob Blake, shot 7 times by police for walking away after breaking up an altercation. Didn't do anything wrong as far as we know, according to all the witnesses there. And police officer literally just walked up to him, grabbed him by his shirt, and then as he was trying to get into his car, just shot him 7 times rather than doing any other course of action. And so that is Jacob Blake's GoFundMe to make sure that he gets his medical expenses taken care of, his kids get taken care of in the meantime, and they're able to afford legal expenses. There's a lot going on the story right now. There's a lot of protests and everything like that. I don't want people to people who are really stressed out from it to be forced into like a long conversation about it, but I did want to make sure that that we had something going so that anybody who wanted to help out can. Please definitely check it out. Please definitely check out this man's story if you can. It wasn't getting circulated for a while until a lot of people started sharing it. It is a really awful story, overzealous. It's all too fucking common too. But yeah, so if you want to help, there's a link directly to something that can help. There's also some bail funds out there for people who are protesting. But right now, I think more than anything, giving funds to Jacob Blake to make sure that he can deal with this stuff is probably the best and most practical thing that we can do for him. But yeah, Black Lives Matter, and fuck the police. So, continuing on. So you can hear I'm using the compressor really to get my acoustic guitars up to a reasonable level, because without, then with. And it's a really, low ratio. Not a super heavy one, nor super hardening or any of that stuff. Attacks pretty dead center in the middle. Release, kind of the same thing. Had a lot of gain on this, but I just wanted to make sure and bring them up in level to that. And then I used EQ to really dip out the things that I didn't like about it and just make slight adjustments, because it's not a ton, but so you can hear like lots of clicky stuff, stuff that's a little hard on the ears, and I just cut a little bit of that out while trying to keep some of the brightness around. And then you can hear if I add in short reverb. There's other instruments there too, but yeah, I did that to add a little width to it, just like the drums. And this is something that's going on during the entire time, so there's a lot of fluctuation. You can see I have quite a bit of automation going, where it's changing levels based on where it's at. Because like in the verses, it makes sense for it to be higher, but in the choruses, there's too much going on for it to shine. So I change the levels a lot, and that's what's really useful about automation. Is if you decide this instrument is too loud, but only in this part, that's what you can do. You can just lower the level in there. I need your help with my please don't tell me you're coming here to promote your music. Don't get me wrong. I'm fine with people mentioning their project, but I don't want people coming in here just dropping random links, because that's something that I've consistently had people do before on streams. I'm all willing to give. Can I send you my music stems? I mean, send music stems as in like, are you wanting me to help with mixing it? Because I wouldn't mind doing that. I'd have to take a listen and make sure it's something that I could come up with something for. Record 10 guitar. I don't know what you mean. Okay. My music stems and what? Okay. Yeah, sorry, man. If you want me to do something like mix your stuff on stream or anything like that, please just send me a DM on Twitter, or to our Glass Beaches Twitter. I don't want the chat to become an entire thing of just like people, throwing out links to different stuff, especially because no offense at all, but we just want to make sure that nobody's like clicking on links that end up being something bad, or if someone does come in and say, oh, I'd like you to do this, and then you click on something and whatnot. Please, if you're actually interested in that, please send us a DM on Twitter at Glass Beach Band on Twitter. Send us a DM there. I've had a few people come into the Twitch chat and do exact things like that, and it makes me worry that it might be either a bot or just like a spammy promotion type thing. And I really, like I said, I really want to save the comment section for talking about what's going on in the current episode. But yeah. Click on this one. Oh, yeah. I mean, I know that link, so. But, okay. So, yeah. Automation used to lower or raise the gain of something or the volume of something in specific sections to make sure that it fits within the section appropriately. So acoustic guitar has their stuff going on. There's some other rhythm guitar parts, like I believe that this is, yeah, this is just some chords I plucked and I did stuff like that. And this is for the chorus. Same thing for this. And then on this very thing, at the end, there's still some acoustic guitar, but I had some seventh chords that I was doing right here as kind of for the jam section at the very end. And I didn't edit these to be super tight because, like, I really wanted this section to I wanted this section to be a little bit looser, you know. And then past that, I believe that, yeah, I think everything else is pretty much leads. So, like, right here we have, oh no, not that. Right here we have some leads for the chorus that are an octave apart. And you can see that with like with these rhythm parts, for example, I did the same thing. I used compression to get it up to a certain level, which I don't usually have to do a ton of because I've already got that built into the patch that I recorded with my line 6 stuff. But I put a little bit in there just to solidify it and glue it together, make it a little bit tighter. I also took the liberty to EQ some stuff, because if you get my text on Twitter. Okay, cool. Yeah. Just if you just send us a DM, I'll reply to that and see if there's anything I can do about it. I'll let you know. Thank you. So if we take out the EQ here, we can hear. It sounds a little bit darker, more mid-rangey. So I got rid of some of this mid-range, and I added a little bit of what could be said to be like the cutting range of the guitar, and a little bit of the body on the lower end. And with clean tones, this tends to give it like a bit of a glassy. Can you do it live now? I cannot do it live now because this is the thing I have scheduled. Like I said, I'll take a look at it, and if I think that I can be of help in one way or another, I'd be happy to look at it. But I'll be replying there and letting you know. Right now I'm breaking down a mix session that I did because I already have this thing planned. This is supposed to be, something that's educational and helpful for whoever's watching and whatnot. But yeah, I'll let you know though. And so from where I am right now, can you look at it? I just told you, not right now. I'm gonna leave it at that, but that's kind of my last warning before, kicking you out of the comment section, which I don't want to do, or the chat. But so with this, the idea is that I'm trying to get more of a glassy tone, which is like why I boosted the range that cuts, and the sort of like the lower end body of it, because I wanted a very nice and pleasant sounding clean guitar. And I did the same thing sort of with these leads here, because in the chorus you can't really in the chorus this isn't supposed to be like front and center. It's mostly supposed to be supporting the vocal melody, because if we listen to it in context, so you can barely hear like the strings getting plucked for that lead part, because it, like I said, it's more support than anything. It's not supposed to shine above everything else. There's a few other leads like this right here. What did I have going here? So yeah, this is an acoustic guitar that I brightened up a little bit. And it's just something that's supposed to work. It's a lead, but it's a lead that's meant to work and dance around like what the vocals are doing. So you can kind of. And that's the important part about arranging, is that you have to decide whenever something is trying to shine, or whether it's trying to shine or whether it's trying to support. And in this case, it's dancing around. And later on, it becomes there's a little bit of a lead that it takes on that's a little bit different. You can hear it's like. It's a lead that like is being mirrored by a whole lot of things, so you can definitely see that this is supposed to be like a supporting lead. In the beginning, we have this little thing. And yeah, and then we also have like you can see there's a lot of like little things like this going on, where we have like and what I'm doing here actually is strumming chords with like a really reverb heavy guitar tone, and then I reversed each of these so that it gives it that feeling of like leading up to the next strum. And then whenever you like have it in context, there's a leak inside my soul. And granted, this is still without like any of the reverb to glue together and whatnot. We even have a little, what is this? I have no idea why that's labeled guitar delay, but yeah, that's a little lead at the beginning that you can hear. There's a couple little solo tracks here that we have. And then Kiazi solo track. And then I have like another solo track there. Yeah, Overzealous. It's really cool. It's little things like that. Like I'm not wanting people to concentrate too much on what's going on here with this. So the idea is that like I tried to. The goal is finding a way to make it in service of everything else that's going on. Because like if you listen to it like this, it's a little bit more audible and present. There's a leak inside my soul. So you can kind of hear it going on, but when you add in reverb and delay and everything that's put on all these instruments, there's a leak inside my soul. It's a little bit more like washy and blended, and it sounds like almost like one track that's going on in the background, and that's kind of the goal there. We also have some we also have this track, which so this is kind of doing the same thing as like the chorus lead, but it's doing it in the verse, obviously. Yeah, and like I said, past that we pretty much have like the solo tracks. And the main thing with guitars, it just kind of blends everything together. Yeah, exactly. And so the idea here for all these things is that the focus is identifying where the guitar is in the sound space. Because now that we're working with a whole lot of instruments, we have to consider not just whether something is left or left or right, but we also have to consider all of this area. And the goal here is to make sure that none of the guitars are taking up too much of one part of the space that might get in the way of each other. So like I said, these guitars, as much as they sound very pretty, they're completely overshadowed whenever it comes to like the full mix, and that's intentional. They're just there to be little twinkly things in the background, you know? And it all depends on like what you want to shine more. But I would definitely say like the best way to add more to your composition to get a whole lot of tracks like this and get a whole lot of really interesting stuff is think about whether or not you're trying to have that part shine or support. And if it's supporting, figure out whether or not it's just going to like mirror the part or whether it's going to dance around it like some of these leads that we have going on. And if we go through, we can see some of the stuff that we have going on. Like for this lead, I really wanted the mids to be apparent, so I boosted right around 800. And the idea is that I'm making space here and here for the rhythm guitars, because I really want the guitars to be taking up space. Like this is really where the puzzle piece stuff comes in together, you know, is I want the lead guitars to occupy the space that the rhythm guitars are not taking up, and vice versa. And this gets more complicated with more instruments that you add, which we'll come across pretty soon. But y'all can more or less see what's going on here. Like I said, for things like acoustic guitar, I'm mostly just trying to deaden out the frequencies that are like really piercing to ears, and emphasizing the stuff that will let it'll be just present enough, you know, like my mentality is that the acoustic guitar is just like peeking out every now and then whenever there's instead of leaving this empty space, this negative space for nothing to be there, there's sort of the acoustic guitar just like lying there underneath for anything that like it gets too quiet, you know. And so from there we can kind of see these strings. Let me tell you, I recommend also checking out Jeremy Jones. Jeremy Jones is a fantastic artist, great string player, amazing singer. We'll get to that last point a little bit later on in this session, but these are the string tracks that Jeremy sent me. He sent me a lot, which is good because I have a lot to work with, and you'll end up with sections like this where it's like, even just by itself, and there's a lot of stuff like that, like a lot of layered harmonies and whatnot. And the trick for this a lot of the time was the fact that, you know, you can see that compared to like this waveform compared to the vocals or some of these guitar waveforms, relatively small. And that's kind of a good thing, because the big part about these strings and the big part with adding a lot of instruments, especially support instruments, is having headroom. And all headroom is is it is the difference between the average volume of a track and the loudest possible noise that you can make within the track. So the idea is that there's a noise floor, which is, you know, obviously the bottom of the meter, and then you have like the top, which is clipping, which is the ceiling. And you want enough room there that whenever you send tracks off to the mix engineer or you are mixing, that you have some room to make everything, you can push everything together and you can make it a little bit louder altogether. And you can notice that in some of these groups. There's a little bit of clipping that goes on in my master bus, but that's like I said, that's a very delicate thing that you have to just like add for taste, and sometimes meters aren't 100% accurate. It can really vary, but yeah, you can see though, with all these tracks, I've always got at least a decent amount of headroom to work with, just so that way I can pull everything together and boost it if I need to, you know? So, and this is kind of the thing with these tracks, is that there's a lot of let me see, did I put no yeah so there's a lot of automation going on with these strings, because there's a lot of points where they can come in and, you know, be pretty effective, but there's a lot of points where I want to just pull back, and I like to imagine that during this whole time that the string players are like coming forward and backwards out of the mix sometimes. See that that whole thing is whenever the strings like get louder there, you know, pretty quiet right here, and then they come in, pull back a little bit, and yeah, and they're pushing and pulling back based on like what's going on and whether or not they're supporting or they're trying to shine. And this is really where automation becomes important. And strings, you honestly don't have to do a whole lot of EQing for. You don't have to do a ton with it. A lot of this is just like dipping out a frequency that tends to make them muddy. And then some of these over here, I'm like adding just a hair of high end to them. And then here I'm adding just enough to like make sure that the characteristics of it are shining. And that's the kind of thing, is that like strings don't require a ton of EQ a lot of the times, unless you're trying to get something that's very, very specific and tightly produced, like a really a heavily processed pop song, for example, would be the best example, I think. And if you want good examples of how strings can sound in a mix, look up some Jamiroquai songs. Canned Heat has some amazing sounding strings. I know everybody associates the movie with, or the song with, Napoleon Dynamite, but honestly, the strings in Canned Heat are pretty fucking nice. I do a very light amount of compression. Whenever it does come through. Yeah. Where did I have you come in? Yeah, so for this, it's like all I'm doing is adding it for because so with this compressor specifically, I was trying to remember what I did with this, but it looks like all I was really doing is I wasn't even like squashing it at all. I was just because this is a limiting amplifier, I was boosting it a little bit with the output gain on here. I can't remember my exact reasoning for in the moment, but apparently it sounded good, so I associate it with Elite Beat Agents. Oh yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, it's a very good song for that. I added a little bit of saturation too, because why the fuck not, you know? Why not? It's not much. Very small amounts, just like on the master bus. I like I said, I just had to do a very delicate touch of processing with these strings, because I wanted just enough. I wanted just enough to be able to gain some control over them, but I didn't want to interfere with the natural, great sounding strings that they gave me. And here's something important too. I know a lot of people associate auto-tune with vocals or Melodyne, which is just another version of like a tuning program. I do advise using it for instruments that you really need to be like on pitch. So the thing about these strings is that a lot of them had to be very on pitch to blend with everything else going on. So believe it or not, I ran a lot of these through Melodyne and did some light tuning. And I'll do that sometimes with like bass, because bass has to be super on pitch a lot of the time, otherwise it doesn't sound as powerful. But I do advise, excuse me. I do advise using Melodyne for things like that. And so I used Melodyne to do some very slight pitch correction on some of these strings, just to make sure that they sounded tight, uniform, and didn't wander too much from each other, so that it sounded like a group of strings rather than what it actually is, which is one person playing a whole lot of string parts, which is hard in and of itself. It's like doing gang vocals, but just by yourself. Oh, it is 3:00. Okay. But yeah, having strings. But yeah, strings have a great acoustic sound to begin with. Exactly. And that's kind of the thing, is like figuring out just where you need to pull stuff out of so that the strings can come through how you want them to. And some of these tracks, you know, like this one at the end is more of like a lead track. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, so whenever I've had leads, yeah, that okay. So now that makes, I don't know why I didn't remember that. So a lot with these tracks, I did a very light amount of compression on these strings. So you can see right here with this one, it's barely getting around 3, maybe 4 dB of compression. Not a ton, just enough to where you can feel the compressor working and you can hear some of the effects of it. And that's why you don't really see compression on the subgroup right here, is because it didn't really need it. I also added some reverb, which I feel like this is a good time to go over this. Normally you will insert reverb under the same thing as like your other plugins, so I could normally just insert reverb right there. The problem is that every time you open a reverb program, it takes up more of your RAM and your processing and whatnot. If you're looking to save processing power, one really useful thing you can do is you can create an aux track or a subgroup or a bus or whatever it's called in your program, add the plugin on it, bring the mix to 100%, and then have it be its have its own like input and then whatever output. Nowadays I put things through an FX bus, but for this mix I had it just going to the main out. And what this allows you to do is, on things like strings, I can pull up a send, and I can send this signal to the long reverb bus, and I can choose how much I do and how much I don't. So if I listen to this, Then we take it away. We add more. So yeah, you can see what I mean. There we go. So you can see how that can be a little bit easier on your processing and whatnot, and it's easier just to have a bunch of sends going to this one reverb that can give you everything you need. And sometimes you need very specific reverbs for whatever track you're on, and that's fine. But this is a really good way if you just are like, I just need reverb. I don't need something that's like super hyper specific, just something that will generally give it more space and everything like that. And so yeah, all these tracks are tracked like layered, almost like layered vocals, I'm gonna be honest. And so all I've done is edit them down, tune them a little bit, do some very slight processing, and then put it through a subgroup, and I added a little bit more reverb to the end of it so that everything is going through some reverb and it all pulls it together a little bit. Oh yeah, I had some claps too. This is kind of like the extra stuff that I had going on. At one point I had some radio static going through this, but I don't anymore. And in the choruses you can hear the clapping. So. And in context, it's not as prominent. But that's because like they aren't supposed to be overwhelming the snare. They're supposed to be adding to the snare. And that's kind of what we've got going on for that. It is about 3 o'clock right now, so I'm going to take a break. But when we come back, I'm going to go over what I have going on in the vocals and how I do vocals for a lot of different projects. Some ways you can save some time, and some ways that you can like just do some cool things. And we'll come back with that in about 15 minutes. I should be back at 3:20. I'll see you guys in a little bit. Okay, and I'm back. Made a smoothie, and now I am ready to dive into the vocals section. So, right off the bat, obviously this song's main attraction are the vocals. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Overzealous. But yeah, so despite everything else, the vocals are what is presented on top of everything. There's some guitar solos, but the vocals are the lead of the lead. And as you can tell, we've got quite a few vocals going on right there. And the way I have these divided up is that I have my lead vocals, which are like these right here, and then I have my backup vocals, which is all the rest of these tracks here. And all the backup vocals, now I'm here for the kick drum. I mean, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. But the way I have it working out is that I have the backup vocals going into their own separate thing before going into the vocal subgroup. And that's mainly to make sure that the backing vocals feel more cohesively like they're supporting the lead vocals than just kind of being around the lead vocals. I want to make sure that the lead vocals are emphasized more than the backup. And you'll notice here I have a single track that I use for tuning. What I'll do is I'll rename it to whatever track I'm or whatever I'm like tuning or tracking, and I'll use Melodyne to tune it and everything like that. Obviously I'm already done with that process, but yeah, so there's a few ways that I like to set up my vocals. I like to make sure that I usually have at least 4 to 6 backing vocal tracks just for like harmonies or whatever. As you can see here, I've added on to that, and that's because there's a lot of really cool vocal stuff that we got to do with Kiasi stuff. So first things first, how do I start off my vocals? How do I get them set up? The first thing I do is I decide how I'm going to track the lead vocals, and there's a couple ways I can do this. The way I went with this, because we were limited in time and scope in a lot of ways, I usually will track 3 lead vocals, and that's typically like what I would prefer to do whenever I have the time and money and resources and all that different stuff. But if you're ever in a situation where you want to get your vocals sounding more prominent, but you can't you don't have the time to go through 3 full takes of the song for vocals, and you want to save time there. So what I do, or what I did here, was I tracked the main vocal, which is just how it is, right now. And then what I did was I took the backup lead track, the track that's reinforcing this main lead track, and I tracked that, and I added this delay on there. And I'm going to explain this first, because this is something that I do starting out. I have my EQ, my compression to bring it up to the appropriate level, and then EQ to make sure that like the right characteristics of the vocal are being brought out, eliminating all this like low end stuff that's not needed, getting rid of some of the funky mids that might be messing with it, and all that different stuff. Dipping out a little bit of some harsher frequencies right there. But what I'll do is I'll add a delay onto the second lead vocal track. And what I'll do here is there'll be like whenever you add this onto it, it makes it into a stereo track, and it'll pan both tracks. One side is completely dry, doesn't have any actual delay on it, is just in sync with the track. But the other side, this panned, this one is 100% wet, and the way it works is that it has 30 milliseconds of delay on it. And what that ends up sounding like is a little strange without context, but let's listen to it. So this is without any delay on it. But then whenever I add the delay to it, so all of a sudden it sounds wider. But that's not just from the delay doing it, because if I just did that and I had it 0 milliseconds, all that would happen was it would go from this to this. Doesn't sound any different, right? So when you add between like 30 and 40 milliseconds of delay, what it does is it creates enough separation that it sounds like two separate takes. And so now we go from that to this. And it becomes obvious whenever it's soloed out. But if you take the chorus, we go, it'll never rain or snow on add in the reinforcement vocal. Such a perfect place, wouldn't you say? Now let's add in the delay. It'll never rain or snow on operate. Without, such a perfect place, wouldn't you say? It's very slight. And that's the point. You don't want your support lead vocal track to stand out too much. You don't want it to you don't want it to become apparent that there's two tracks there, unless you're going for like that chorusy kind of sound. Some people like that. There's a lot of rappers who do it. There's some indie bands that do it. But when you want your vocals to sound uniform and like it's one person singing, this is a great way to make it sound bigger with only two tracks. And using a delay to make it sound like three. Saves you quite a bit of time, surprisingly, if depending on how good the vocalist is that you're working with. Now I've added some saturation to the lead vocals here, as you can tell. You can listen to this. Take me to the desert. So and if we go, it'll never rain. And if we listen to it with the saturation, and if we go, it'll never rain. Just enough that whenever he's like really belting out the notes, you can hear that harshness, and I think that works really well with it. So what you end up with now is you have these two tracks that are your lead vocal tracks. It creates a more cohesive and solid sound because there's a leak inside my soul. Because if you just solo the first lead track, just sounds like that. Wouldn't you say? Now if we add in the other one, such a perfect place, wouldn't you say? Takes up a little bit more space. And you can sometimes hear at the tail end, like you can hear the other track at the very end, that little A at the very end. But that's not important. That's not going to be heard in the grand spectrum of things if you literally take it into the main context. You can go here. Can't even hear it. And that's kind of the thing, is that it's so negligent that it doesn't really matter. And I do this throughout the entire thing. These vocal ticks are pretty similar. The only one thing that I don't do that I didn't back up is this. And it's just a woo. It's not anything like super wild. Now over here, all this is it's similar structure to this. It's like you got your vocal outro, but you've also got your the track reinforcing it, the second lead vocal track with the delay and everything.
We're rocking, we're rolling, the vibe is out of control here. We're rocking, we're rolling.
And that's just supposed to sound a little bit, it's supposed to sound a little drowned out and like lo-fi almost. So we have that going. So that's not too complicated. We also have some automation going. You can kind of see further out. I raise it up in the choruses where there's more stuff going on. The idea is that I want to just sit on top of everything. I don't want it to be like so far above everything that the other instruments are a little hard to make out. I want it to just be sitting right on top of everything, or it needs to be. And the outro, it's supposed to sit just below. So that's kind of where the automation comes in on this. So with that being said, we can move on to the backing vocals. So backing vocals, you can do a lot with backing vocals. You can straight up replace entire swaths of instruments with backing vocals if you wanted to. And it can be really fun. A lot of times the way that I'll do things is I'll I'll look at a chord progression and I'll find a way to play those chords in a way that all the notes fit within the range of the singer, and then you can have these layered harmonies going on, which is how we get things like this beginning segment where there's just there's one note, another note. There we go. And so the idea with that is that I'm using panning, which you can see. Let me move over here. You can see here how like all the voices are panned to different spots, and that's to make sure that they fill out the entire area. And they're also EQ'd specifically so that the characteristics of the vocal are what come through, so that even if there's like a guitar in that area or there's drums in that area, the vocal has like sort of a spot that it can fit into, and that's kind of the thing, is I want just enough there. It's also the reason why I double track a lot of these backing vocals, is I really want to make sure that that they're heard, and that it takes up enough space in the mix. I like to view it as like the backing vocals are kind of like a blanket in this, and you'll hear throughout that there's like a bunch of different things that happen. For example, right here, this track right here is Jeremy Jones himself doing some backing vocals. One take. Dude is a fantastic singer. So by yourself you can hear.
And off we go. Never rain or snow on our parade. Such a perfect place, wouldn't you say?
You'll notice that you'll notice that I cut out or at least in the take there's no there's a word missing.
Oh, never rain or...
And that's because interesting little trick that you can do when you're doing backing vocals. I didn't do this as much here, but in a lot of projects I will do this. When you have backing vocals, you can cut out most, if not all, the consonants that are expressed in backing vocal tracks, unless they are on their own and they're the only things like saying a certain word. If they're just harmony vocals, as long as there's a lead vocal on top, you can get rid of the consonants. You can manually edit those out. And the reason for that is because of the fact that you can hear in a lot of tracks, whenever someone sings something, unless they're like a classically trained choir singer who has been trained specifically to avoid something like this, you'll have a lot of tracks where like at the very end there'll be things like if a word that ends with S is the last word in a section, you'll hear lots of like like at different times. I mean, not unlike what you hear here with this.
You say.
Only with consonants, which are much harsher. And the idea is that consonants are percussive. So as much as they have pitch, they're not associated so much with the melody. So if you get rid of those consonants, all you're left with are the vowels, where like the notes are being held out. And the idea with that is that you're just getting like the quote unquote pure note. And it makes it a little bit easier to blend the vocal tracks, so it doesn't sound like there's a bunch of different vocal tracks going on, but it sounds like one cohesive track with a lot of harmonies around it. It's a pretty good technique, especially for singers who aren't used to doing that kind of thing, which frankly I don't expect many to be, because even amongst like professionally trained singers, I've met a lot who don't consider stuff like that, and that's fine. But you can hear here, continuing on talking about this, you can hear this is simple harmony.
Never rain or snow on our parade. Such a perfect place, wouldn't you say?
And Jerry just kind of went and did that on his own. Really great take. But we wanted something a little bit more, which is why we added these tracks. Similar to what we did in the very beginning. And when you put them all together, yeah, it's overzealous. It's not something that's immediately apparent, but it's something that I learned. I learned from both from school, and I actually learned from I think it was, I can't remember if it was the vocalist, but someone from a band called This or the Apocalypse posted a video at one point about production, and that got brought up. And it's a really interesting little thing. It's a really cool way to make a section of vocals sound very clean and professional, even if the singer's a little sloppy in that regard. But yeah, it's a super useful tool. I advise it for a lot of people, because sometimes you'll meet singers that you can literally just be like, hey, make sure you watch where you're ending your S, because I want to make sure that those line up. And some singers will get it, and sometimes you'll meet singers who don't. And I'm a firm believer that whenever you're stuck in a situation where the performer is not necessarily grasping what you would rather them do, the best thing you can do is find a way around it. And in this case, that is editing out consonants for harmony tracks, that is. But so if we add those oohs that I just showed you along with the harmonies, we get this stacked kind of thing.
And off we go. It'll never rain or snow on our parade. Such a perfect place, wouldn't you say?
And I will say too, if you're ever worried, because people will talk up and down about how like autotune's a terrible thing and whatnot and all that different stuff, just know I put all my vocals through at least a little bit of tuning, unless the person I'm recording specifically requests no tuning whatsoever. I put a little bit of tuning on, and there's a limit, because you could hard tune things and make them sound really, really like just very like on the note, which is what I'll do sometimes for like these vocal tracks that are not as prominent in the mix, just because I want them to be really on pitch. But I tend not to do too much hard panning because it's not really needed as much, you know. Like I said here, this sounds good.
It'll never rain or snow on our parade. Such a perfect place, wouldn't you say?
And you know, we did a few other things like what we have going on here. Some of these vocal tracks are a little like they're a little mixed up in some spots. Like I said, this is Jeremy's harmony track, but right here this is actually me singing. So it's kind of a thing that just like the tracks aren't as organized as I would like them to be, but that's just something that happens sometimes, you know. I like to think I'm a fairly organized producer, but not the most organized. I feel like for most genres, tuning doesn't detract from anything. Yeah, I mean that's true. It's true. Most of your favorite records have tuning on them in one way or another. It's not something to be afraid of. It's like I said, it's a tool. It's a tool, and if anything, I advise if you really don't want tuning on your record, I advise at least singing. I advise at least doing some tracks and using some tuning to hear what it sounds like after the tuning, because there are slight differences that you'll be able to hear, and it might actually help you out a little bit. It's almost like writing a guitar riff and then making sure and then using editing to put it together into one like solid clip, and then from there learning that riff. It can be a really useful tool for learning also. Sometimes they can be used in cool stylistic ways. That too. Sometimes you can do like T-Pain style kind of stuff. And it can be really useful. I mean, Glass Beach does it. But yeah, either way, it's a tool. It can be a useful one. So like I was saying, in this section, it's funny because these tracks are Kiazi, this one's Jeremy, and these are me. So we got all kinds of vocals in here. Oh, come on.
23 winters left me feeling emptier than most.
And this is one of those moments where we had a change in the bass, where we were like, we want the bass to follow along the vocals at certain points. So like you can hear it. I'll show you.
23 winters left
right
me
here.
Emptier than most.
But yeah, and that's kind of that thing that we got going on. Now, here is the big vocal section. Well, let's actually take a moment. Let's listen to it in context with everything. So, this was a really cool section to do, and I'll explain why. So first, mute that. So something that's really cool here is that besides the drums in the latter half and these plucky strings, it's mostly just vocals. So we have the main vocal line. So it's kind of like a 4 repetition kind of like little vocal section. Now, the way we did this is that we had two types of like harmony sections. One was following along with the desert flower, but then we also had some chords that were being sung by that were just like oohs in the background. It was funny because it would be like it would start with ooh and then it would end with ah. So like, I'll show you what I mean. Which sounds very basic, like like whenever you just solo it. But what we did here is we had similar to the harmonies that we had like earlier on. We layered some of these various things. We had we had two higher harmonies. I think it was two higher harmonies for the thing that followed along with the desert, the actual lyrics. So I'll show you what I mean. This is perfect. This is what that sounds like. This is what that sounds like with no consonants. Listen to how weird this sounds. I cut out all the consonants of these harmonies. Sounds really weird, right? Like, doesn't sound like, well, it sounds like it could be interesting, but it doesn't sound like good by itself, you know? Very strange. But when you add the lead vocal over it,
Desert flower interlude. Tell me
and then some reverb,
feel it too. We'll spend whole hours beneath the moon and never leave.
so yeah, you can see how it sounds a little bit better. But the cherry on top are these ooh-ahs right here. So the way we had it going was similar to the very beginning that we had over here. It's two of one harmony, two of another, and then two of a third one. So we did that here. So these two are this.
Desert flower in
And so, yeah, overzealous. The reverb does a ton for it, and this is a moment whenever like really washy, like a whole lot of reverb is a very good thing. Like I used a lot here, and that can, like I said, that can sometimes be a good thing. So the ooh-ahs. The way I actually did this was I took my acoustic guitar and I would like play notes that worked with these chords. And I would find ways that worked within the vocal range of Kiazi, and we eventually stacked on these harmonies. You can hear that kind of here too. So we have this one. And this one actually changes the most, but whenever you like stack them, you can start to hear. And these are the blankets that these harmonies sit on. And then when you add the lead vocals that are you know on top of everything.
desert flower interlude. Tell me that you
And what better way to glue it all together than reverb?
will spend
So then you add in the context of we have the little plucky strings that are playing around it, really keeping out of the way of everything. Which, frankly, if you truly wanted to, you could even replace these with vocals. That's a really cool thing. Is it really depends on how vocal centric you want a sound. We end up with a really mystical sounding section. And for all of these vocals, I didn't really do much. I really just I kind of did the same processing for most of them. Did some light compression. Some of these I used the Pro Q3 instead, but yeah, for the most part, like, I just did a little bit of EQing, like I said, to help them fit into place, and then compression to bring them up to volume. And yeah, it ends up like really pulling together in a really cool way. And then the last section that we do is kind of where, like, I stop trying to do some tight production, and instead I just kind of have it like be a jam section that just lets the instruments to the top. And a little tidbit is that both of these solos, both this one, this one, and the one right here, those are both me. And the way I worked with these is that, like, I really wanted I wanted this guitar. This is kind of the different mentalities behind this, is that, like, I wanted this guitar to have this slightly glassier, like, very tappy tone to it, because I wanted it to sound like one of the guitars that was already playing. One of the guitars that was already playing like a rhythm part suddenly did like a lead. And you can see I've added just a little bit of distortion to it, so you can, without, with, just a hair, adds a little bit of hair on that. And then the solo at the end, I really wanted to go with the vibe that this was like a beach jam session, which is why you end up with acoustic guitar, and then, like, the goal of this guitar was to make it sound like it was coming out of a very crappy lo-fi amp. So you end up with and you sort of you end up with the there's a few things playing this lead, but the strings kind of like overwhelm the others. And then from there, we just do like an easy fade out, you know? Also, a thing that I feel like is important too is that you'll notice that I have short reverb, long reverb, and delay as like these different things. I do use two different reverb settings at the very least on my subgroups, because I tend to find that there's some things that benefit from short reverb to just give it just enough space, like the acoustic guitars and a lot of the rhythm instruments. A lot of those things I can gain just a little bit of size from them by adding just a hair of this small of this short reverb, something that's not too long, maybe 2 seconds at most, not like a big room size, but something that's bigger than just a normal room, and then making that a whole thing. Versus this is a pretty cool plugin, but you can do this with the Air Reverb plugin. Honestly, it's it's capable of similar things. The only difference with this one is that this one is this is a native plugin to Pro Tools, and this one can emulate rooms throughout the world that have been sort of measured and modeled, so that if you want, like I have right here, this is a large chapel in Chicago, sampled by David Gauger, and that's kind of the that's the whole point. Is it's supposed to sound like that, like something's in that chapel, and you can choose a few different things about the settings of wherever your sound source is. Hold on just a second. But yeah, the thing is that it's made so that you can essentially just act like whatever you're putting through this reverb is inside this chapel, and you're just choosing what space it occupies, where it's aiming, and all that different stuff. But yeah, and these two serve a little bit different purpose. The long reverb is a little bit it's meant to be washier, obviously, because I mean it'll give you listen to it. If you listen to this, let's find the chorus, and then we'll show you the short reverb first. Versus the long reverb. It sounds more ethereal, floaty, and so you can use them in different respects. Delay can serve a lot of purposes too. What else did I use delay on in this? Yeah, okay, so I used it on that. There's the hair on the vocals, not a whole lot, but that's just more to taste stuff. But yeah, so more or less that's kind of how like I do everything, and I'm sure that y'all noticed this up here, this stuff. These are markers. I don't know what the equivalent is in other programs, but it's just a way for me to tell, like, oh, okay, I want to hear the chorus, or I want to hear the interlude section, or any of that. I know instantly where to jump, and I know I don't have to worry about, like, oh, that wavelength, like, I'm pretty sure that's that track or whatever. I like to know exactly where I need to go in a session. I like to make sure that, like, oh, I need to get to the vocals. Cool, I'm in the vocals. I need to get to the drums. Okay, I'm in the drums. It's like I like to have visually easy to read sessions, because it saves me time, saves me confusion, and I don't have to worry. Also, you're going to notice right here, I've written some stuff in these. They all say tuned. When you're tuning tracks, you can lose track. If you have a lot of vocal tracks, you can lose track of which one you're on. I advise writing out whenever you've finished tuning a track, or just using like the notes section to be like, I already did this in this track, like edit it or whatever, just to keep track of your progress if you use Pro Tools. I'm sure there's a notes section in other DAWs, but yeah, session organization makes a big difference. I know that some people don't organize things quite the same. Some people will group all lead instruments together and rhythm instruments together, rather than like guitar, bass, and vocals and stuff like that. But it's all to your taste. It's whatever you think will help you work faster. And that's what I advise. Figure out organization methods that work for you. Figure out ways that you can minimize having to do more work where it's just like, oh, I'm just going to do this really fast. You know, like putting reverb on something doesn't have to be every time a thing of like, oh, I've got to figure out exactly how I want the reverb to work on this. It's like, I just need a little bit of reverb on this. It doesn't really matter if it's like very specific. I can save myself a ton of time with just doing that. And it makes a difference whenever you're working with a client on a deadline, you know? Yeah, I like to think that it's pretty smart stuff. My professors taught me well. I know a lot of people will say back and forth whether or not it's worth it to go to audio engineering school. And if you don't know anything, and you know a school that has very good professors who give you a realistic impression of what it's like to get into the sound technology world, sure, it can be very useful. My education was super useful, but I tend to tell people to avoid places where it seems like they're selling you on the idea of being like, oh, you're going to be the cool producer, audio engineer. You're going to always be mixing for the band front of house, and you're always going to be, you know, the guy who's like mixing and mastering. It's like, no, get you the professor who will teach you how to like use things like Beat Detective and Pro Tools, the person who will teach you how to edit things, the person who will teach you the practical skills that you need, that will break down things for you in a way that's easy to understand, and in a way that you can, like, if you're at a job and someone is, you know, asking you how something works, you can explain it with a little bit more ease. I also think that a big part of this, and a good lesson that a lot of people can learn, is learn how to work with people. And I know it's harder for some, and I know that there's some people that you're just not going to be able to work with, and that's fine. Some people are more okay with producing with people that they don't like as much or don't get along with as well. But the most important thing is learning how to get the most out of your client. A lot of these takes, there's a lot of times whenever, like, Kiazi himself was worried about some of these vocal tracks or any of these things, and it sounds great. Like, the track sounds fantastic now. But that's the trick, is like knowing whenever you've gotten a good performance out of someone, if you can get a better one out of them, and like if you feel like something is getting in the way of the production, whether it's attitude or just lack of inspiration or anything like that, figuring out ways that you can overcome those problems are very important. I know most people don't expect to get into psychology whenever they get involved with things like music production, but if you're going to be a producer, you usually have to know that to some extent. But yeah, so that's this session. Pretty much, I think that's pretty much it. Next time I would like to start looking over some other things, and I would like to at some point I'm planning on getting I want to get a session together that I can sort of mix in front of y'all and show y'all like how I would handle it and whatnot. Realistically, if I was like, okay, cool, I have until the end of the stream to finish mixing this and do that, because I've done a few things on writing songs and music projects and whatnot. So I want to start focusing on giving like information on some of this stuff, and eventually I'd like to make more bite-sized information that I can post on something like, I guess, TikTok or something that people can absorb. But for now, I think this pretty much covers most of the session and what I had going for it. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to do next week yet, but at 5, Jonas is going to be getting on. Do I know what Jonas is doing? I am not 100% sure what Jonas is doing at 5. Playing Kiro Blaster. Okay, cool. Jonas is playing Kiro Blaster. Thank you, Overzealous. Anything that you find helpful about this, great. If there's anything that you hear that you're like, I want to hear more about that, please let me know. Give me a suggestion on Twitter, because I definitely want to figure out better things to do for this. Yeah, it's a very good song. It's a very good song, and Kiazi deserves some praise for what he wrote here. I'm very proud of what I did here. But yeah, and to be honest, I think that I might in the near future be doing some Roll for Streetwise stuff on here, which might be a really good opportunity to go into some of that mixing stuff. But yeah, either way, I'm gonna go ahead and sign off because I think I've covered everything that I really need to here. I'll probably be putting out some polls pretty soon about like what I can do in future episodes and everything like that. I still haven't decided whether or not I want to take over streaming on Tuesdays as well or not. I've started meeting up with a friend over some writing stuff, so I'm not 100% sure. But Wednesday will be Overwatch Wednesday, so he'll spiel was fun to listen to. Well, that's good. I'm glad. That's the most important thing, is people learn and have fun. That's the big thing. Yeah, Jones will be on at 5, and if I'm not on tomorrow doing something, then I'll definitely be on Wednesday doing Overwatch again. And yeah, for now I'm going to do Black Lives Matter. There we go. There's one more link to Jacob Blake's GoFundMe. If you can give to help him out, that'd be great. You can only imagine dealing with having to deal with getting shot and like the possible things that are going to come from that. There's a lot that's going on about it. Read into the story if you can. There's more details surfacing at the moment, and yeah, all cops are bastards. So yeah, y'all have a good one. Thank y'all for tuning in. I'll see y'all next time. If not tomorrow, then Wednesday. Bye bye.